Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
Welcome, I'm Ross Lauder, your host from Single Focus Talent, and I'm joined by our non-exec director, John Quigley, today.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Today we're joined by Henrique Araga, GM of EMEA at G2. I'm very, very keen to talk to him because G2 is an organization I'm quite familiar with in the software space. It's really disrupting B2B tech buying by connecting buyers and vendors based on authentic customer-driven reviews in real time. So this allows organizations to really get their validity of user interaction out to the marketplace and spread that word. So welcome to today's show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ross, and good to be here with you guys.
Excellent. It's our pleasure. Well, look, let's kick it off and dive right in. I mean, it seems like you've come very much from a consultancy background into Accenture and then into SaaS as well. But let's dial it back right at the beginning. Maybe take us through, some of your education and what led that to where you are today, and some of those inflection points and decision trees, if you were along the way.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing I normally start with is highlighting where I come from, which most people, when they speak to me, they don't quite make it out, but I think the exotic name tends to give it away. So I was born in Brazil, and I moved in and out of the UK throughout my childhood, and only really moved back to the UK for good in 2008. So I consider myself an import, an immigrant, and I've been working in software in one capacity or another for the last 15 years. Mostly in sales, but I started off in services, as you said. And I started off really, well, when I came to the UK, I was finishing my master's. I had a political science kind of degree background, and I went into more sort of economics. And I had 2 years as a foreigner in the UK to sort of get my life together. Otherwise I had to go back. And I was looking for a job in, I think, 08, 09, which anyone was around that time in a working capacity, they'll remember it was the start of one of the biggest recessions of our times.
Sure.
So I was thrust into the first job that would take me. And thankfully it was a tech company. I thought I was going to work in finance because I thought that's where, money and sort of career progression was at if you were based in London. But I ended up in tech out of necessity first. And that was in a HR technology company. I was joined as a product manager. Incidentally, it's also where I met my wife. So I have the 08 financial crisis to thank for that. But also it was by going there and meeting my wife, Laura, who was a young professional like myself, that I realized that I wanted to get into sales. I realized that I had spent an enormous amount of resources, both time and financial, on a very privileged education. And I met her, and she was, she went to dance school, and she was always very determined, but she didn't have the same kind of educational background than I had, and was incredibly more successful in business than I was, and making a lot more money than I was. So I was really curious about sales, and I was there for about 2 years or so in sort of product management, and then I started to get into a little bit of pre-sales as well. But then I came across an opportunity to sort of really get my career into sales going by becoming a professional services sales engineer for a small consultancy that was sort of dabbling in this world of like cloud CRM, so Salesforce technology, which was all kind of new back then. And again, I think more by chance than by design, I ended up jumping into the world of cloud CRM and the ecosystem that is Salesforce.com. at a very early stage. And I think I stood to benefit from that significantly, and quickly progressed into sales roles. I then moved to another consultancy, which we eventually grew into a 200-person consultancy. We ended up becoming, this company was called Tequila, really funky name. We're kind of out there with the branding, but we were the largest consultancy for Salesforce.com services in Europe. When measured by the number of certified consultants, we were bigger than like the big players, like Deloitte, Accenture. They were all still stuck doing like Oracle, like Siebel implementations back then. And that's really where I learned where I got my stripes in sales, and really learned consultative selling. Managed to sort of deploy a lot of my, I'd say my technical side. I mean, I've always been quite techie, and I think going into pre-sales and consultancy really helped me kind of understand that side of sales. But consultancy is really valuable, right? And you learn how to sell value. You're not selling something that's commoditized. So I was there for almost 5 years. I managed my first team. I was promoted very early on to a managing director role for the business, and we sold to Accenture. So by the end, I was, I think I was managing a 20 million revenue business. I was a very young senior manager at Accenture. And then I thought, well, and I did have shares in that business. And what I really enjoyed was this idea of, in sales, you get to be your own boss. And if you get to be your own boss, you can sort of learn how to build businesses. If you build businesses, you can, make a lot of money and you can drive a lot of change. But I'll be honest, like in services, I think services is more of a, I think it's more of a margin play, and we were more in the growth game. So the financial windfall wasn't that substantial for somebody like me in my position. So I decided I want to go into product, and then I approached, one of my mentors introduced me to a serial entrepreneur, Goddard Abel, who had built a successful technology business, which he sold to Oracle, and he was building his new business, which was based on the Salesforce platform and ecosystem. So I managed to convince him to take me on board to build out his European team. And then I worked for him and for Salesforce after the acquisition. So that company got acquired by Salesforce as well in 2016. And then I spent 3 years at Salesforce scaling this product line. It was a configure price quote. The company was called Stillbrick. It's now known as Salesforce CPQ. So the ability for you to configure, to price, and generate quotes inside Salesforce CRM. And it was a great ride. I spent 3 years. We built an amazing business in Europe across multiple countries. And I just said to him, hey, if I ever get the chance to do this again with you, but at an earlier stage, I'd love to do it. And him and my old CRO boss, Matt Gorniak, were already raising a Series C for their other venture called G2.com, which they founded in 2012. And I got wind of a Series C raise in October, and I called them up and I said, hey guys, Europe is waiting. I'm here. When are we going to do this? And 4 months later, March 2019, I landed in Europe with the title of General Manager for EMEA as first person on the ground. And we've been doing that now for 18 months.
I love that. I think you've touched on a couple of things that I can certainly resonate with in my career. And, the margin play in services versus product makes complete sense to me. Services is great, very margin rich, but the scalability is more of a challenge. Whereas with product and adoption, that's really where you start to get PE and VC attention. And it's all about market share at that point in time. One of the things, just winding back to what you said earlier in the conversation, that really struck me was being a sales engineer. So that's something I can certainly relate to. I'm what I would describe as a closet geek or a part-time geek. Somebody who isn't fully out there, but I really love it secretly. So I come from a computer science background, etc. And I've worked in organizations like Dell, Quest, and HubSpot. And, I was in sales, and then I went into kind of technical product configuration and kind of being that pre-sales resource as well. I always found that was a distinct advantage because it gave me a level of fluency on the phone. And there's a lot to be said for people who have the gift of the gab and can really speak to, a value proposition. But when you're put on the spot on the phone and you're asked a technical question, I find it serves you very, very well. So I suppose my question to you is, how did that play into scalability? And like, what for you were the defining factors? You talked about scaling significant businesses there to 200 people. I mean, that's not an accident. How did you do that? And really, how did sales engineering play into that whole formula, if you would share?
Yeah. Look, I think it definitely played to my advantage, but I definitely have learned over the years as well that people succeed for different reasons, right? And for me, having that interest and that expertise, that was definitely it for me. Consulting, especially technology consulting. So you've got management consulting, you've got technology consulting, right? In a nutshell, if you're a management consultant, you're an expert in an industry, you're an expert in processes, and you're driving change at that level, right? And a lot of technology consulting, in a nutshell, it's just a fancy way of calling, hey, we come in and we set up your systems and we integrate your systems and we get it up and running, right? So if you're a small consultancy, as we would have called ourselves at the time, really what we were doing is we were coming in, understanding how you run your business, yes, how you could do it differently, but in the end of the day, you're paying us to set up a system, customize it, right? And a lot of the sales process would have tended to be showing you the art of the possible. So there would not have been a single sales process that would not have involved some kind of demonstration of a customized environment. So for that particular world, if you didn't have the either the resources to be able to drive that kind of engagement in your sales cycle by having sales engineers with you, or the expertise to drive it yourself independently, you weren't going to succeed. So I think that was really, really key for us. And as we scaled, we did scale with a sales team and a pre-sales team. But when you had a salesperson or an account executive that was technically inclined, completely transformed the dynamics of how you engaged within your team, but also with customers, right? So I would have, based on my background, I could come out of a meeting, let's say a 3-hour meeting with a prospect, and I could already start to draft like a draft statement of work or a project plan. And I could pull something very high level together that, once it came down to later on in the sales cycle and it had to go through internal validation review by our technical team, it wouldn't have gotten shot down. And so moving forward into product, when I've always, sorry about the background noise. When I have looked at how we scaled our sales teams in product environment, I've sought to bring that in as well. And I think back maybe 6 years ago, it would have still been a very serious discussion. Like, should salespeople know how to demo, and should they know how to use the 3 different types of industry-specific demos we have? And there would have been a lot of back and forth as if it was something that could be defended. But I think today everyone would agree that if you don't know your product, if you don't know what it means for your customer in specific use cases or industries, and you're not able to bring that to life, you're not going to do well. And so I'm glad that my background allowed me to sort of develop in that way and build teams that valued those skills as well.
I think the whole pre-sales element, pre-sales engineers, that kind of thing, is vitally important to the success of organizations, and their successes is somewhat unheralded sometimes, in terms, because people just remember the sales and the deals and the guy who's at the end of the process that books the deal, and that's in a lot of organizations I've seen. The most successful partnerships I've seen is a 1-to-1 ratio of pre-sales and kind of enterprise or high-level account manager, because the pre-sales seem to have this incredible ability to ask what I call risk questions that kind of stop someone in their tracks and get them thinking, "Ooh, that's a good question." And questions possibly that salespeople are afraid to ask, or don't even think to ask sometimes, but they add significant value to building up the trust level. So look, I absolutely am aligned with you in terms of the whole kind of pre-sales and how important that is. You've had a pretty meteoric rise in your career to date. Now that's by anybody's standards, and kind of now sees you as the GM of EMEA for G2, which is a pretty big job. Tell us, what do you attribute that meteoric rise to?
Well, I think that's very flattering. Thank you.
No
I wouldn't put it that way. Look, I think there's a combination of things. I think being in the right place at the right time. I've had bosses and people who have taken me on board, who've taken a chance on me. I think we hear a lot of people talking about, hey, I want someone hungry. I want someone, who's scrappy. I think one of my CEOs, gosh, I can't remember who it was now, said, we look for people who are polished street rats or something like that, some kind of term like that. Look, I think I was lucky to be, as I said, I fell into this world of software as a service and CRM in the cloud at a time when it was just taking off, and I did very well out of being in the right place at the right time. But one thing I've done as well in my career is I've always sought to stay close to and loyal to entrepreneurs that I felt I could learn a lot from and that could take me forward. So, if you look at my CV, like the last 2 jobs that I've had, albeit over 5 years, they've been basically working for the same group of entrepreneurs, and we call it the entrepreneurial family. And so I think that having at least that kind of focus, if you don't know what you're going to do, but the kind of people you want to work with and sort of learn from and stay close to them and be proactive about staying in touch and figuring out what they're doing next and how you can add value, I think really is helpful. But then I've also had the benefit of, working for organizations that valued impact over tenure, and Salesforce is very much like that. There's a ton of, really young, ambitious, incredibly successful professionals that, in similar sized companies, you would only see in those kind of roles, maybe with 10 or 15 years additional experience. So I think if you're working for the right sort of companies that value impact over experience, you get to benefit from that. And yeah, I mean, I don't consider it meteoric, a meteoric rise. I think that if you're in businesses that are in the right place at the right time, I mean, Tequila went from, when I joined, 15 people to 200 people in 4 years. Steel Brick that got acquired by Salesforce, it was an 18-month turnaround from Goddard Abel and his business partners acquiring the business and selling it to Salesforce. Even after we sold to Salesforce, we were growing that business by a compound annual growth rate of 80% year over year. So I think if you're in those kind of businesses that demand a lot from you and you're able to keep up, and I would say as well, really invest in learning outside of the job so that you don't get left behind. And as the business progresses, you stand to benefit from it. And that's certainly something that I've sought to do. And hopefully with G2, it will allow us that opportunity again.
Very good. Yeah, and when I say meteoric, what I mean is you seem to have had a shit ton of momentum, which, like you said, if you have the ability to hang on to that and go with that wave, then you're going to see the rewards of success. So there's no doubt in my mind that you've worked incredibly hard to get where you are right now. So well done on that. Tell us a little bit about I'm curious about your philosophy on sales and how you define success.
Mind sharing a little bit more what you mean?
Everybody has a different philosophy in terms of what sales is about, and some people would kind of bandy around, it's about this, it's about that, it's about whatever. But for our listeners, if someone was there and they wanted to get a decent handle on what this whole thing is about, what are the, from your perspective, what's your philosophy, or what are the couple of fundamental things they need to know in order to be hugely successful in sales? And you know, how do you define success in sales as well?
Mm-hmm. I think it's I think it's actually a really hard question because, as I said, so many people want to get into sales or build a career in sales for different reasons. And I think the most, I mean, when you think about motivation, one of the most misunderstood motivators around sales is that people are in sales because they want to make money. But I think it's true that a lot of people want to get into sales because they want to make more money, but very few people stay at it and derive pleasure, enjoyment, fulfillment from it because of money. There are much less stressful and I'd say consistent ways to earn money through your life rather than being in sales. But I think what it is for me, and I think that, you know, I probably I'm not alone in this, but I certainly am, you know, I don't think everyone thinks this way. For me, it's really about deriving fulfillment from being able to shape your business and shape outcomes for other people's businesses, right? So my background is in consulting originally, sales consulting. So I was always very curious about what it takes for businesses to grow and to transform and to drive outcomes, you know, from, I don't know, working with Burberry, setting up their first contact center, or I don't know, it was a case, I think HR Owen, who was a luxury car dealership in London, you know, having the opportunity to learn how they treat all of their VIP customers and how they route all their calls, like having a genuine interest in how these businesses work and what it takes for them to make money and to grow, I think is, you know, is something that's really transferable into any sales role. And I think the most successful salespeople that I've had the pleasure of working with or working for, or even my most satisfying sales engagements have been those where I've actually derived a lot of pleasure from the curiosity of understanding someone else's business. And we're talking the B2B environment here, right? Someone else's business, and then being able to drive that outcome. And for me, it's what's at the core of like this entrepreneurial fire that whether you're in sales or whether you're a business owner, you have, is that feeling of I can shape the world and I can shape outcomes. So that's kind of like my philosophy in terms of like the raw skills. Like I think everyone needs a process. Everyone needs habits that are proven and that you can transfer with you across, you know, industries, across phases in your career. And for me, that's always stood me, you know, in very good stead in terms of frameworks that you've either acquired, learned over the years, and you replicate those when you move on. But yeah, I think to be successful, it's just that curiosity, right? If all you're chasing is a number, as exciting as it is to see, you know, the needle shift on a dashboard, I don't see longevity in that.
I love that. I love the customer outcomes and the impact, and kind of, you know, figuring out how do you measure impact at the customer side. And we just did a podcast before this about an hour ago with the CEO of Pipedrive, and he spoke a lot to you know, what he looks at. The key metrics that he looks at is customer usage and how they're using the software, how much and how often, and that kind of thing. You know, so the value, because I see this a lot, that you point somebody in the right direction, you spend a lot of time with them in terms of the value proposition, and you tell them this is the impact it's going to have on their organization if they deal with you. But then the mistake sometimes is people confuse training for impact. So they say, we have all of these resources that are going to, you know, help train you, and going to, you know, we're going to help you kind of use our stuff. And they think that's the jump off point. But it's not. It's the jump off point is how do you help people use your stuff in a way that helps them unlock or realize the impact that you told them was going to have on the organization. That's the key. And training doesn't necessarily do that. Training kind of helps you to, walk around software, helps you walk around products and solutions and kind of understand how to use them, but not necessarily how to trigger or unlock that impact. And my general feeling is that, you should be going back into organizations in 3 months' time or 4 months' time or 6 months' time and having discussions around impact, only impact. What business value did you realize as a result of hiring our stuff to do these jobs? Is it working out or is it not working out? And I just think that's where the focus should be. But you mentioned kind of some of the salespeople and people with curiosity and all that kind of stuff. And tell us, how important is hiring properly, and what have you learned in all of your hiring endeavors today? Because I'm sure you've been involved in hiring tons and tons and tons of people. So tell us how important hiring the right people is, and how do you spot the superstars, or how does that happen?
Hiring, yeah. Hiring is one of those things that I think you get better by iterating on, right? And I think it's part of any leadership journey, which is learning about how what worked for you isn't necessarily going to work for others. And I think we all go through that journey of, that we find people like me, or, who show the same attributes as me, the same strengths or skills. And because if it worked for me, it's going to work for them.
Yeah. As I always say, God forbid there would be like 20 people like me in an organization.
Right. But, I think at some point everyone is guilty of that. And I certainly was when I first started hiring.
Okay.
But look, I don't think I have a recipe. I think that I've learned a few lessons. I certainly have found that people are really good at interviewing. That's usually a red flag for me, because anything that you do a lot of, you become good at. And personally, if I'm in an interview process for someone and they're just like doing an amazing job in the interview process, that tends to get my my sort of alarm bells going.
What do you mean by an amazing job? Is that like they have all the stock answers and everything is right, and there's
Okay. And they don't fumble, and they're not nervous at the start, and they don't show vulnerability, and it's all polished, and that person's such a great salesperson, and in the interview process is just like ticked all the boxes. Like, that's a really big red flag for me. I also found that I really liked, and I think this is probably getting into, John, one of your points later on the chat today, but I think it was Ben Horowitz in his literature. He says, you should hire for strength rather than lack of weaknesses. And I think that that's one thing that I've learned as well, is that when you open up an interview process to a panel, and you must do that by all means, it's very easy for you to go into this sort of situation where everyone's like, this candidate has all of these downsides, right? Or he hasn't done this, he hasn't done that, and you start to sort of forget about what is that person really good at. What is the one thing that they're an amazing, professional in, and actually thinking about how that works for your organization. So I've really focused on that over the years, and also that's really informed my philosophy on coaching as well. But that's another topic. But as far as interviewing goes as well, I think that finding evidence outside of the interview process is so key. So as you progress through your career, you build a network. And even when you don't have a network, I think for me, it's always been very helpful just to let me go back and see, the companies this person has worked for, who seems to have been the manager or senior leader for that business during that time, and just cold outreaches to people and sort of trying to paint that picture outside of the interview process is incredibly helpful. And I think finally, for me, is this concept that just because someone can do the job doesn't mean they're the best fit for the job, right? And I'm going through this at the moment because we're ramping up hiring again at G2 in Europe, and there's always going to be more people that you would like to bring in than you're actually able to. And sometimes somebody ticks all of the right boxes. They've got the right experience. They've been in the right industries. They know the tech space that you're in, versus someone else. But that first person just doesn't have that drive. They're not inspiring you. They're not, that your experience with them outside of the interview process as well is not filling you with excitement. And so that means that even though they can do the job, probably in their sleep, do they really want it? And especially in sales, you've got to really want it, right? Because there's so many more letdowns than there are let ups, let's say, and that
but will they do the job right? That's the consideration. So yeah, that fire
in the belly, right?
Yeah,
fire.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really look for that. But apart from that, just keeping the interview process as diverse as possible, bring as many perspectives in as you possibly can. And in the end of the day, if you've done all of those things, you should still really trust your gut, because, the psychology of decision making is that you will make your decisions emotionally, and whatever you decide, you're just going to find a rational way of doing it, right? So if you've done the right thing by bringing as many people from as many diverse backgrounds as possible, making the process as fair as possible, I'd say still trust your gut in the end of the day.
Yeah, because
it's definitely worked for me.
There's so many instances that we've come across recently where there's a process for really high growth technology companies, and they say, well, we want you to be in front of a panel, as you intimated there. We want to do a role play. We want to go through 3 stages. We want them to give a 30, 60, 90. We want to do this plan or whatever. But they have very aggressive kind of growth trajectories and hiring plans. And then you're told, okay, we want you to do all that, but we want you to hire these 20 people tomorrow. And so then it's kind of a contradiction. How can I do all that and get all of these people by the end of the week or whatever? I know I'm exaggerating there, but you kind of get where I'm coming from. So I like your philosophy that would kind of, help you to kind of tag certain people in terms of putting them into sequential order of, preference based on, like you said, the intuition piece, but also, the red flag people and all these people, well, then maybe they're not going to make it. And maybe, you seem to have a quick kind of methodology there to be able to assess people, but obviously then kind of see how they get on within the confines of the process. But you have a keen eye and ability to be able to kind of spot that talent, Will you tell us a little bit just about the composure and the size and the structure of your current organization? So, kind of what kind of roles do you have, kind of how many people, how many salespeople do you have, kind of what does your current organization look like that you manage in EMEA?
Yeah. Well, it's evolving, as you can imagine. We're now just tipping over, I think we've just tipped over 20 people in region. It's evolved over the last 18 months in a significant way in terms of the organizational structure. But ultimately, my accountability is first and foremost to revenue. And so that's been our main focus. Well, I'd say revenue metrics have been the main metric for us, but when you come to sort of introducing a new business into a region, there's so much more beyond revenue that comes into play. But the organizational structure is, so in Europe, we have an acquisition team of account executives, about 6 or 7 people now. We have a team of relationship managers who are also quota carrying roles, primarily focused on managing the renewals and the ongoing relationship of our existing customers. And that team is coming up to 5 people. And then we've also got business development representatives. So I know that people call, sometimes people say SDR, BDRs, we call them BDRs in our business. So we've got the business development team. We've also got a customer success team. We've wrapped up business development and customer success into an operations manager. And then we've got a manager for the acquisition business. And I'm line managing our account management team. I think that for me at the moment, in terms of where we are, that is the area of greatest strategic long-term relevance for us as a business, which is looking after our customers, helping them grow. And as we continue to bring on board more customers, that team's going to grow, and we're probably going to build out our leadership team there as well. But this is all very much like, it's changed a lot in the last few months. So I'll give you some context. When we first started building the team last year, we had hybrid sales teams. So our customers were being brought into the business, and then the relationship was being managed by the same person. So we had that, and then that evolved as we brought in more customers. We didn't have a business development team. We didn't have a customer success team. So it's very much fluid over the course of the last 18 months.
So I'm curious to kind of drill into G2 as an organization, and what it is that you did. You said you got wind of a funding round, Series C funding round. I know G2 from having worked at HubSpot, and HubSpot were at Series D, and they had a lot of funding behind them at $100 million. But not everybody knows the funding circles, and not everybody necessarily knows the product. But one of my tools in my toolbox was definitely G2, because I was able to tell people from a customer-driven perspective, from a user perspective, what the tool has done by way of making a difference in that kind of the delightful leadership quadrant, as it's sometimes referred to, from a marketing automation standpoint. But I'm curious to know, like, where did your spark and interest in G2 come from, and where are you guys heading as an organization, and kind of what puts the fire in your belly, as it were, as to where you guys are going, if you could share?
Yeah, sure. So Ross, you gave a really good introduction to G2 at the start of our conversation. So I'll save the listeners from going over it again. But yeah, I think what's really exciting about G2 for me is that basically it's a marketplace, right? It's a two-sided marketplace. And when you look at marketplaces, there's the buyer side and there's the seller side, right? When you look at, I don't know, a business like LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn, for many years, it was just a social network, professional social network, right? But it took years to get that up and running until it was also of value to businesses, right? And sort of build that business behind it. So G2 was started in 2012, and I wasn't there from the beginning, but my original boss, who is one of the founders and was CRO as well, Matt Gorniak, and he tells me stories about how, like, he would be on the phones, trying to get people to write reviews, right? And it's basically the reason why I'm so excited about it is because it's based on this fundamental belief that the way in which we buy software has become, or is becoming, increasingly more like how we buy everything else in our lives, right? So you wouldn't buy a $300 flat screen TV without checking out for reviews, right? So why would you go and buy a $3 million piece of software without checking for reviews, right? And everything we do in our lives is predicated on seeking trustworthy, independent, unbiased advice and information, right? Typically, who do you trust the most? You trust yourself. You then trust probably your family, your close friends. And after that, you probably trust people like you who don't seem to have an agenda towards what decision you make. And I think that's really what the power of reviews is. And for many years, the only alternative to that in the world of B2B software has been, analysts, right? I don't know how many people trust a case study when they're deciding between what software to use. I always thought it was a nice to have, but I certainly never used it to buy software personally. Analysts seem to always have that kind of gravitas, right? Because they're experts, they're independent. But if, Ross, you mentioned how you use G2 at HubSpot, if you were an up and coming disruptive technology company like HubSpot would have been, 8-9 years ago, probably would have learned that, analysts can't keep up with the pace of innovation that is going on in tech. The proliferation of software. I think the statistics now is that the average enterprise company is running 13,000 software applications, growing at a rate of 10% year over year. SMB companies, something like 100 applications, growing at 20% year over year. There's not enough analysts in the world to write about all this tech. And, in the majority of cases, they're not using the technology either. So that's why I'm so excited about G2, because I think that, especially now when 100% of the buying process has shifted online, this kind of information will be increasingly valuable to buyers everywhere. And so the ability to serve those buyers and then also to help software companies, sales, marketing teams, be less of a nuisance and actually contact buyers that are actively in the market rather than just somebody who happens to fit your ideal customer profile. And, excuse my French, piss them off via an unsolicited outreach is something that I think will significantly transform the buyer-seller relationship in software. And, on a personal level, similarly to like a LinkedIn or a Google, I don't think that 5 years from now, there will be 4 or 5 G2s. I think there'll only be one. And if I can be a part of the journey of ensuring that one is the one that I get to be involved in, for me, it'll be, exceptionally fulfilling.
Okay, so what you've said there, I think for me is key. My big takeaway there was the fact that it's a marketplace and there by definition it's self-perpetuating. The challenge you have is really centered around that 13,000 figure that you shared with us. That's mind-blowing, quite frankly. There's no way, as you rightly say, that any analyst, team of analysts or army of analysts for that matter could ever deal with that. I'm curious, just as a very point-based question, because you have visibility across the whole of the marketplace, software or SaaS marketplace. Where are you seeing trends right now?
Depends what we mean by trends, but I've recently been looking at a lot of the data. So we also have our research analyst team who pulls over data on a regular basis. And a lot of our customers, we also have like 20 institutional investors as customers who ingest our data to understand precisely the answer to that question. What's hot right now? Where is the opportunity? Where are the markets? Where are the market opportunities for incumbents as well? Look, this year has been a very interesting year for reasons that we're all very familiar with. I don't think we need access to G2 data to get a feel for what happened in March. But so I can tell you that when we looked at the data in March, anything that had online associated to it, be it online events, online conferencing, webinars, any piece of technology that enabled remote working, distributed workforces, in the spring, we were seeing spikes in buyer interest, which we measure by basically traffic to those specific software categories on our website, spiked by between 50 to 500% in a period of a month. Now, we were curious about what that meant for the longevity of businesses, right? And what that meant in terms of especially software buying trends. And so we looked at the data again from March until August, and what we found was really interesting. What we found was that, first of all, the overall interest in doing online research as part of a sales process increased significantly. If you can imagine, all of the events that people would have been planning to go to had been canceled, right? All of the marketing dollars shifted from field marketing to online. So there's a lot more stuff going online, sort of pushing people to sort of learn, to discover, and so on. So we saw a big shift out in G2, but we also looked at what were the big technology categories that started to surge as we sort of started to open up the economies over the summer and going into August, September. And what we found was that there were a number of laggard technologies, specifically less focused on remote working, but more on enabling digital processes, right? So areas like robotic process automation, sales tech, marketing tech, technologies that allowed to facilitate for social distancing, contact tracing. So even like technologies like visitor management, which typically you would have associated to like checking people into an office, which you would have thought, well, those businesses are going to really be struggling. They actually saw a big resurgence between March and August as companies started to reopen, but wanted to reopen in a safe environment. Contact center operations, everyone working from home, that we started to see a big take up in those areas of customer engagement technologies as well. And interestingly, that trend has maintained itself. What's become clear from our research is that companies haven't just sought to adapt to a crisis, but they've now understood that we are in a new, different type of world. And fundamentally, we've probably accelerated years of, digital transformation in a matter of months. And, when you look at the stock markets and you look at what's been happening to stock prices from technology companies, it kind of all becomes clear, right? We've seen that the, technology stock is basically driving economies, which is kind of scary as well because of all the social implications of what this means for social inequality. But we're certainly seeing that in G2. And I have a lot of peers in Europe, who are building out, sales tech, marketing tech, businesses for US headquartered businesses, and pretty much without exception, whether they're in sales intelligence, providing sales data, sales engagement, providing ways for previously, field-based salespeople to now operate remotely, they're all seeing a huge surge of interest.
I think that's probably the most comprehensive answer I've heard thus far on that. And I would very much echo the sentiment that you've had by way of our own first-hand experience in the marketplace. The digital transformation has accelerated, but it's very much inequitable from a social standpoint. So I think that's very key. And that obviously has wider ranging political, economic, socioeconomic consequences, as it were. But I suppose as we wrap up here, I'd love you just to share your sentiment on culture and how you disseminate culture in your organization. What does that mean for you? It's what I like to think of. It's what folks do when leadership isn't around. But how do you get people to kind of walk the walk and kind of live that set of values?
Yeah, I was just discussing this with my wife the other day. My wife is actually a sales leader in a tech company as well. And I confided in her by saying that one of the toughest questions that I get asked, and I didn't quite know what the right answer or the right way of answering was, when someone asks you, "What's the culture like in your company?" Right?
Sure.
And it's like it's hard, right? Like if you think of big businesses, you might think that they have a certain culture, but actually the culture that you have really is the culture in your team. And then when you have a team of teams, and you go into sort of more senior roles and your organization expands, you end up with loads of different unique cultures within those teams, right? And we've all heard, that people leave managers or they leave teams, they don't really leave a company. But what I try and do is like, I try and live my values, and I try and live my values in a way that's congruent with the company values. So the way that I connect culture is through values. And that's also what I tend to ask to candidates when we're interviewing. I ask them back the question, well, have you read up on our company values? Which one of those resonate the most with you and why, right? And I think that's really the key to sort of building culture. Every team that I've been a part of, we've had a different culture, and it's a representation of who we are and how we're aligned to the company values. But what I try and do, as a leader, and I've tried to become more of a conscious leader over the last couple of years. It's a big process that we've been going through as a leadership team at G2, is to become more conscious leaders. 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership is a great book to get stuck into that. But one of the things that I've tried to commit to, which I find has helped immensely with building our culture, is to try and be a leader that leads with an open heart, and really feeling your emotions and not covering them up, and sharing your emotions. And what that does is it really helps you speak in what we say is an unarguable way, right? You can't argue with how I feel. So if I tell you how I feel, and I practice this as a leader, you're only ever going to speak from a position of openness and candor, right? Whereas if you speak from a position of righteousness and, this is the truth, or, this is how it should be, you're basically speaking from a position of control and fear. And I think that, in teams where you want to encourage independence and decision making that's decentralized, if you speak from a position of an open heart, and ask myself, how do I say the truth, my truth, and not the truth, my truth, in the most loving way possible? I think that really builds a culture of openness and decentralized decision making. But that's what really resonates for me. And again, as I said, alignment to your company values, and how do those values align with your purpose in life, and how do you find meaning in your work by doing the job that you do, right? And how does that align with your purpose? We talked about impact, but I really think that if you find purpose in life through work, that's one of the most powerful combinations to really drive a strong culture.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's no higher authority than your own personal truth, and I think that's what everybody should be striving for. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work all the time, but it certainly is the fundamental basis for open and honest dialogue, and at least a platform for people to feel that they've been heard, and that other people are showing a willingness to understand various perspectives. So look, as we finish out, I think you alluded to it earlier on, the superpower. Talk to us a little bit about what you feel your superpower is, Henrique, if you don't mind.
I'm only allowed one, aren't I, John?
I'm sure you've many. There isn't a doubt in my mind, and your humility is probably stopping you from talking about them. I get that too, but just fire your superpower at us, the one that dominates them all. And again, for context, a lot of people, some people are very strong at product. They're good engineering background, and they're focused on solving market problems or particular problems for personas, and what really drives them, features and functionality, and adding value, all that stuff, right from a product perspective. Some people are, as you just spoke about there, culture and teams, and really finding talent and really embracing and kind of creating an environment of autonomy to let people kind of succeed and to help people succeed. And then other people are great at operational things, process, efficiency, effectiveness, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, kind of where are you leaning towards in terms of your superpower?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for me, it definitely is more around the process consistency side of things, predictability, repeatability, driving scale. I think that one of the things that has helped me is just being committed to having habits and sticking through them, and I think especially in sales and sales leadership, and as you grow as an individual, just having habits, I think, is really key. Whether that habit is how often you coach your team, whether that habit is how you employ a rigorous forecasting and sales methodology, and just sticking to it, being committed to them and to making those habits, I think for me has been a very important skill set. And I think it's something that a lot of people can sort of focus on. It's not something that you either have it or you don't. I think it was Aristotle who said that, like, we are what we repeatedly do, right? And that excellence then becomes not an action, but a habit. So when it comes to our sales teams, I talk a lot about how we need to practice, rather than just wing it. The best athletes, they train, they don't just wake up knowing how to do what they do really well. We think that these people that we admire have these extraordinary willpower, to do undesirable things or uncomfortable things, but actually all they've done is they turn it into a habit, right? The Olympian doesn't struggle to get up at 5 a.m. every morning, not because they have amazing willpower, but because it's part of their habit, right? And the same way that somebody that you admire for being a great salesperson or for doing great sales pitches, they weren't born being a great public speaker. They probably practiced that 6 or 7 times and they've turned it into a habit. So I think I've applied that philosophy to a lot of elements of areas of my work and teams that I've had the pleasure of leading. And I think that it's, I think people feed off of that as well. You know, they start to see, okay, this is going to happen again. And, you know, we're going to have this process again, and we're going to have another coaching conversation that's going to go exactly like this. And they sort of feed off of it as well. For me, it's been incredibly helpful.
Amen to that. Wow. I love the Aristotle quote, "We are what we continually do." And I totally resonate with that, because it's the little day-to-day tasks that you repeat on a regular basis that form the bigger picture. Tony Robbins talks about this. He says most people overestimate what they can achieve in a year and underestimate what they can achieve in a decade. And that's very true. That's very much been a cornerstone of me and how I kind of get my mindset in gear as to what my goals are and breaking them down. I always say in regular basis, I do a lot of mentorship calls with other agencies in this space. And I say, how do you eat an elephant a bite at a time? I cannot thank you enough, Henrique, for the tremendous level of value you've brought to our audience today. I think John and I will both have a fierce volume of notes after today's call. So I really want to thank you for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind we'll have you on the show again if you're up for it.
Hey guys, pleasure's been all mine, and I really appreciate the invitation.
Really enjoyed it, Henrique. Thank you so much. And I hope you really enjoy your weekend now. I hope there's not too many restrictions on you at the moment, but
we'll make the most of it whilst we can, guys. And I hope you both stay safe and make the most of what you have and what you can do in the next few weeks.
Indeed.
Exactly. Yeah, here. Okay.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.